On the shores of the Mediterranean, the sun really knows how to shine. It is so powerful that one stays inside during most of the day with the doors and shutters closed. The houses look as if everyone were asleep or no one was at home. The young foreigner felt as if he were in prison, and his shadow rolled itself up until it was smaller than it had ever been before. But as soon as the sun set and a candle lighted the room, out came the shadow again. It was truly a pleasure to watch it grow. Up the wall it would stretch itself until its head almost reached the ceiling. The stars seem so much brighter here, thought the scholar, and he walked out onto his balcony, where he stretched himself just as his shadow had done. And on all the balconies throughout the city, people came out to enjoy the cool evening. Only the house directly across from his own was as quiet now as it had been at midday. Often he stood and stared at it, but no one ever came out. One night, the young foreigner, who slept with his balcony door open, awakened with a start. A breeze had lifted the curtains so that he caught a glimpse of the opposite balcony. The flowers were ablaze with the most beautiful colours, and in their midst stood a lovely maiden. For an instant the scholar closed his eyes to make sure that he had them open. Cautiously he parted the curtains, but the girl had vanished. The light had disappeared, and the flowers looked as they always did. The next evening, the scholar was sitting as usual on his balcony. From his room the lamp burned brightly, and since his shadow was very shy of light, it had stretched itself until it reached the opposite balcony. When the young man moved, his shadow moved. "I believe my shadow is the only living thing over there," he muttered. "See how it has sat down among the flowers. The balcony door is ajar. Now, if my shadow were clever, it would go inside and take a look round. Then it would come back and tell me what it had seen. Yes, you ought to earn your keep," he said jokingly. "Now go inside. Did you hear me? Go." And he nodded to his shadow, and his shadow nodded back at him. "Yes, go. But remember to come back again." The young man rose, and the shadow on the opposite balcony rose. The young man turned around, and the shadow also turned around. But then there happened something that no one saw. The shadow went through the half-open door of the other balcony, while the scholar went into his own room and closed the curtains behind him. The next morning, on his way to the cafe, where he had his breakfast and read the newspapers, the scholar discovered that he had no shadow. "So it really went away last night," he marveled. More than anything else, the young man was embarrassed. People were certain to notice and might demand that he explain, or, worse than that, might make up explanations of their own. He returned at once to his room, and there he remained for the rest of the day. That evening he walked out onto his balcony for a bit of fresh air. The light streamed from behind him as it had on the evening before. He sat down, stood up, stretched himself. Still there was no shadow, and though it was doubtful that anyone could see him, he hurried inside again almost immediately. But in the warm countries, everything grows much faster than it does in the north, and less than a week had passed before a new shadow began to sprout from the scholar's feet. "Ha! The old one must have left its roots behind. What a pleasant surprise," he thought happily. Within a month he walked the streets unconcerned. His shadow, though a little small, was quite respectable. During the long trip, for the scholar was going home, it continued to grow until even a very big man, which the scholar was not, would not have complained about its size. Settled once more in his own country, the scholar wrote books about all that is true and beautiful and good. The days became years. The scholar was now a philosopher, and the years became many. One evening, when he was sitting alone in his room, there was a very gentle knock at the door. "Come in," he called. But no one came, so the philosopher opened the door himself. Before him stood the thinnest man that he had ever seen, but judging from his clothes, a person of some importance. "Whom do I have the honor of addressing?" the philosopher asked. "I thought as much," replied the stranger. "You don't recognize me, now that I have a body of my own and clothes. You never would have believed that you would meet your old shadow again. As things have gone well for me since we parted, if need be, I can buy my freedom." And the shadow jiggled its purse, which was filled with gold pieces, and touched the heavy gold chain that it wore around its neck. On all of its fingers were diamond rings, and every one was genuine. I must be dreaming," exclaimed the philosopher. "What is happening?" "Well, it isn't something that happens every day," said the shadow. "Then you're not an ordinary person, you see. Nobody knows that better than I do. After all, didn't I walk in your first footsteps? As soon as you found that I could stand alone in the world, you let me go. The results are obvious. Without bragging, I can say few could have done better. Of late, a longing has come over me to talk with you before you die. Oh, you must die, you know. Besides, I wanted to see this country again. Only a rogue does not love his native land. I know that you have a new shadow. If I owe you or it anything, you will be so kind as to tell me. I hate to be in debt." "Oh, how can you talk like that?" replied the philosopher. "What debt could there be to pay? Be as free as you wish. I'm only happy to see you again, and I rejoice in your good luck. Sit down, old friend," he invited most cordially. "Tell me how all this came about, and what you saw that night in the house across the street." "Oh, very well," agreed the shadow, and sat down. "But first, you must promise me that you will never tell anyone that I was once your shadow." "Don't give it another moment's thought," the philosopher said. "I will never tell anyone who you really are. Here's my hand on it. A man is no better than his word." "Right, now I shall begin," announced the shadow. And it stamped its boots as hard as it could on the philosopher's new shadow, which was curled up like a poodle at the feet of the man. Perhaps it did this because it hoped to attach the philosopher's shadow to itself, or maybe just because it was arrogant. But the new shadow did not appear ruffled. It lay perfectly still and listened, for it too wanted to know how one could be free and become one's own master. "Do you know who lived in the house across the street?" asked the shadow. "That's the best of all. It was poetry. I was there for 3 weeks, and that is just as edifying as having lived 3,000 years and read everything that's ever been composed or written. This I say, and what I say is true. I have seen all, and I know all." "Poetry," cried the philosopher. "Yes, yes. She's often a hermit in the big cities. I saw her myself once, but only for a short moment, and my eyes were drowsy from sleep. She was standing on the balcony, and it was as if the northern lights were shining around her." Go on, go on. There you were on the balcony, yes? Then you walked through the doorway, and... Yes? I was in the entrance hall. That's what you sat looking at all the time, the vestibule. There was no lamp in there, and that's why from the outside the apartment appeared dark. But there was a door. It opened onto another room, which opened onto another, which opened onto another. There was a long row of rooms and anterooms before one reached the innermost, where poetry lived. And these were ablaze with more than enough light to kill a shadow, so I never saw the maiden close up. I was cautious and patient, and that is the same as being virtuous. Come, commanded the philosopher curtly. Come on, tell me what you saw. Everything, and I'll tell you about it. But first, it has nothing whatever to do with pride, but out of respect to my accomplishments, not to speak of my social position, I wish you wouldn't address me so familiarly. Oh, forgive me, exclaimed the philosopher. Forgive me, it is an old habit. and they're the hardest to get rid of. But you're quite right, and I'll try to remember. Now, please do continue, for I am immensely interested. Everything, said the shadow. Everything. I have seen all, and I know all. You could not have stayed there and remained a human being, but it made a human being of me. I quickly came to understand my innermost nature, that part of me which from birth can claim kinship to poetry. When I lived with you, I didn't even think about such things. You remember that I was always larger at sunrise and at sunset, and that I was more noticeable in the moonlight than you were. Still, I had no understanding of my nature. That did not come until I was in the vestibule. And then I became a human being. I was fully mature when I came out. By then you had already left for the south. Being human made me ashamed to go around as I was. I needed boots, clothes, and all the other trimmings that make a man what he is. So there was nothing else for me to do but hide. I came out only in the evening. Then I would walk myself up the walls to get the kinks out of my back. Up, peeping through the windows of the attic, and I saw what no one ever sees, what no one ever should see. It's really a horrible world, and I wouldn't be human if it weren't so desirable. I saw things that ought to be unthinkable, and these were not only done by husbands and wives, but by parents and the sweet innocent children. I saw, said the shadow, I saw everything that man must not know, but that he most ardently wishes to know, his neighbour's evil. If I had written a newspaper, everyone would have read it. But instead I wrote directly to the persons themselves, and I wreaked havoc in every city that I came to. People feared me so much and were so fond of me. The universities gave me honorary degrees, the tailors gave me clothes, and the women said that I was handsome. In a word, each gave me what he could, and so I became the man that I am. Oh, but it is getting late, and I must say goodbye. Here is my card. I live on the sunnier side of the street, and I'm always home when it rains. How strange, remarked the philosopher, after the shadow had left. The years and the days passed, and the shadow came again. How are things going? It asked. Oh, replied the philosopher, I've been writing about all that is true and beautiful and good, but no one cares to hear about anything like that, and I'm terribly disappointed, because those are the things that are dear to me. Well, they aren't to me, said the shadow. I've been concentrating on gaining weight, and that there's some point in. You don't understand the world, that's what's the matter with you. You ought to travel. Look, I'm going on a trip this summer. Would you like to join me? If you would like to travel as my shadow, it would be a pleasure to have you with me. I'll pay for your trip. You go too far, retorted the philosopher. Well, it all depends how you look at it. The trip will do you good, and travelling as my shadow, you'll have all your expenses paid by me. Monstrous, shouted the philosopher. Well, that's the way of the world, and it isn't going to change, said the shadow, and left. Matters did not improve for the philosopher. On the contrary, sorrow and misery had attached themselves to his coat-tails. Finally, he became seriously ill. You look like a shadow of your former self, people would say. And when he heard these words, a shiver went down his spine. You ought to go to a health resort, suggested the shadow when he came to visit him again. There's no other alternative, you know. I'll take you along for old time's sake. I'll pay the expenses, and you'll talk and try to amuse me along the journey. I'm going to a spa myself because my beard won't grow. That's a disease too, you know, because beards are a necessity. If you're sensible, you'll accept. We'll travel as friends. And so they travelled, the shadow as master and the master as shadow. They arrived at last at the famous resort where people came from all over the world to be cured. Among the guests was a beautiful princess who suffered from seeing too clearly, which is a very painful disease. She noticed at once that one of the new arrivals was very different from everyone else. He had come to make his beard grow, she was told. But that's not the real reason, she muttered to herself. And to satisfy her curiosity, she went right up and spoke to the stranger, for the daughter of a king need not stand on ceremony with anyone. Your trouble is that you cannot cast a shadow, the princess announced. Your Royal Highness is getting well, exclaimed the shadow. I know that you suffered from seeing too clearly, but you must be getting over it. You show signs of perfect health. Yes, I grant you that it is a very unusual one, but I do have a shadow. Other people have just ordinary shadows, but I despise the ordinary. You know how one dresses one's servants so that their livery is finer than one's own clothes. Well, I let my shadow pretend that he is human. As you can see, I have even bought him a shadow. It was very expensive, but I am fond of doing the original. That night there was a great ball that everyone attended, and the shadow danced with the princess. The princess was light on her toes, but the shadow was even lighter. Such a graceful partner she had never had before. They discovered that he had once visited her country while she was abroad. There, too, the shadow had peeped through all of the windows, those that faced the street and those that did not. He had seen both this and that, and he knew how to tell about some of what he had seen and how to hint at the rest, which was even more impressive. The princess was astounded. She'd never spoken to anyone who was so worldly wise, and, out of respect for what he knew, she danced with him again. The next time they danced together, the princess fell in love. The shadow noticed the sudden change with relief. She's finally been cured of seeing too clearly, he thought. The princess would have confessed her feelings immediately if she hadn't been so prudent. She thought of her realm and of the people she ruled. He knows well the ways of the world. That's a good sign, she commented silently. He dances well. That is also a virtue. But is he really educated? For that is very important. I'd better test him. And then she began to ask the shadow questions so difficult that she herself did not know the answers. An expression of confusion came over the shadow's face. "Ah, you cannot answer," exclaimed the princess. "I learned the answers to questions like that in childhood," said the shadow. "I believe that even my shadow, who is sitting over there by the door, could respond correctly." "Your shadow? That really would be remarkable." "Well, I can't say for certain," continued the shadow. "I just wouldn't be surprised if he could. But, Your Royal Highness, if you will allow me to make a suggestion, my shadow is so proud of being thought to be human. If Your Royal Highness wishes to create the right atmosphere so that the shadow will be able to do his best, please treat him as if he were a man." "Well, I'd prefer it that way," said the king's daughter. And she joined the philosopher who was alongside the door. She questioned him about the sun and the moon and about the human race, both inside and out. And he answered every query, both cleverly and politely. "What must the man be worth if his shadow is so wise?" thought the princess. "It would be a blessing for my people if I chose him for my husband. I shall do it." The shadow was very amenable. It agreed without hesitation that their plans must not be revealed until the princess had returned home. "I will not even tell my shadow," he said, while he thought how admirably the world had been created. Not long after, they came to the land which the princess ruled, whenever she was there. "My good friend," the shadow began to the philosopher, "now that I'm as happy and as powerful as anyone can hope to be, I'd like to share my good fortune with you. You may live with me always here in the castle. You may drive with me in the royal coach, and you will be paid 100,000 gold pieces in a year. In return, all I ask is that you let everyone call you a shadow, that you never admit to anyone that you've ever been a human being, and that once a year, when I sit on the balcony so that the people can pay me homage, you lie at my feet as a shadow should. I might as well tell you that I am marrying the princess, and the wedding is tonight." "No, no, this cannot happen," cried the philosopher. "I don't want to do it, and I won't. You're a fraud. You're a fraud. I will tell everything. You fooled both the people and the princess, but now I will tell them that I am a human being and that you are only my shadow who'd been masquerading as a man." "No one will believe you," warned the shadow. "Now be reasonable, or I'll call the guard." I intend to ask for an audience with the princess, replied the philosopher. But I will speak with her first, said the shadow, and you will be imprisoned. The shadow's threat very quickly became a reality, for the royal sentry knew whom the princess had chosen to be her husband. You're shivering, remarked the princess as soon as he entered her chambers. You must not get sick this evening, not for the wedding. I've just had the most horrible experience that one can have, replied the shadow. Imagine, oh, how fragile a shadow's brain must be. Imagine my shadow has gone mad. He believes he is a man, and that I am his shadow. Oh, how dreadful, she exclaimed. He isn't running around loose, I hope. No, he's not, he said softly. I'm so afraid he will never get well. Oh, poor shadow, continued the princess. He must be suffering terribly. It would really be kinder to free him from that particle of life he has. Yes, the more I think about it, the more convinced I am that it's necessary for him to be done away with. Quietly, of course. Oh, it seems so cruel, said the shadow, when I think of how loyal a servant it was. And a sound resembling a sigh escaped from the shadow's lips. How noble you are, exclaimed the princess. That night, the whole city was brilliantly lighted. The cannons were shot off. Boom, boom, boom. The soldiers presented arms. Oh, what a wedding it was! The shadow and the princess came out onto the balcony, and the people screamed, "Hurrah!" The philosopher heard nothing of all this, for they had already taken his life.